Thank you everyone for being here today. It's really exciting. It's such an energy in the room. Myself and John have been working behind the scenes to try and put together the guest list, and we've reached out to a number of you, and the call has been heard, and we really see a huge amount of engagement here today, which makes this such an exciting launch event. I think that the quality of the gene pool that we have in the room is very high. We've got representatives here from various different stakeholder groups. And I think the opportunity for us all to work together to try and figure out, well, what are the things we need to put in place to support the next generation of semiconductor startups? This is just a fantastic opportunity, a momentous occasion. I'm very excited to be a part of it. First of all, my role in NovaUCD is Head of New Ventures and Investments. So what, may you ask, is such a role about? Well, I could give you an example by way of description. So I joined there about 2017 after running my own businesses for many years. And I walked in to try and help people who had great ideas, inventions, to turn those ideas and inventions into products and services and ultimately launch companies. And I walked into the office of Bogdan Staduski, who was running the millimeter wave group at the engineering school at UCD. And he introduced me to a colleague of his, Dirk Leipold, who's based in California. And we began a 6-month program of talking about work that had initially been discussed by them when they both worked at Texas Instruments back in the 80s and 90s. So it was very exciting to see this. It was almost like these guys were getting the band back together. It was very cool. And they had this idea that they knew could be applied, but they were waiting for the process technology to get to the resolution needed to make some of their experiments feasible. And what they needed to do was to tape out a chip at global foundries, and all they needed was £1 million. So that was my job, right? Help them get the money. So I rang Helen and Jerry at Atlantic Bridge. They came in, we all had a chat, and we put together a very elaborate plan to set up this business. And ultimately it was backed out of the gates by Atlantic Bridge, the University Bridge Fund, which is a specialist fund that invests in university startup companies, and which UCD and Trinity College were involved in establishing over a decade ago. So that was an example of my work there, working with people to put together a business case to raise investment. And then came the challenge of, well, how do we resource this company? So we've got two very exciting technical geniuses with a bundle of cash. We need somebody who can actually run the operational side of the business. So we introduced Jason Lynch, who's now the CEO of the company. He came to us at NovaUCD looking for opportunities. So it's serendipity that brings these things together, and the connections that are made through occasions like this, where we have different people who've been through this process before, meeting people who are new to it, different skill sets coming together. These are the constituent parts of what ultimately becomes a success, after a decade. These things don't happen too quickly. So my role in NovaUCD is to try to help that happen across a range of different areas. And what we do at NovaUCD is really try to help companies connect with the capital that's going to help them to scale. So this is the reason why we've got involved with the I-C3 consortium. So we're not the experts in semiconductor by any means, but what we do seek to achieve is the connections between people that ultimately lead to good outcomes. And so NovaUCD is a collaborative place for these kinds of projects. So what's our role here? Well, it's to access the right capital, help you to access the right capital at the right time. And our objective will be to create a two-sided marketplace. So on one side, we're going to have the companies, and on the other side, VCs, and ultimately then a good knowledge of the grant supports that are available for these companies as well. So we want to connect you guys with the money that's going to suit the stage that you're at in order to help you to make progress. And I think from my perspective, what I'm trying to learn about today is, what are the steps here? We work a lot with companies in regulated industries, therapeutics, medical devices, where the regulated nature of this market means there's stages to how investment is raised. And I believe that there could be something similar here in the semiconductor space, where you're going through different stages of technical demonstration, of proof of concept in a virtual and physical way, that are getting you to these different inflection points. And so for us to really understand where they lie and what are the investment points or the different types of grants that can support those different stages is going to be really important for us to help you to make progress effectively. So what will this funding support program look like? Well, This is not prescriptive. What I'm going to talk about today is our idea as we set it out in our proposal. But ultimately, this is something that we will modify based on the input that we get. But to give you a flavor of what we're trying to achieve here, I'm going to go through two different aspects of the supports that we feel we can put in place that you will be able to engage with as companies in order to support the journey towards raising investment or getting access to non-dilutive grant support. So we're going to run this in two streams. We will have one person who's recently joined our team, Ronan Ahern, who's sitting here at this table. He'll be our I-C3 venture manager. So Ronan has a background working with VC firms and also with deep tech projects. And his job will be to connect our member companies to VCs and ultimately help with the process of getting things started on those types of engagements. The second role we're going to hire for will be a grant access manager. This person will be responsible for monitoring and promoting the available grants to the community and then supporting the application process to those grants. And obviously working very closely with our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland who already work on this, but there will be a level of specialization and help that will go on here from the centre as well. We'll also provide grant writing support through Tyndall, who have expertise in that area. So these things will be available to the members. So this team will work directly with the I-C3 client companies to map out and understand, well, what does your funding pathway look like, what possible sources of capital would be suitable, and how can we make a plan to move forward over the next 3 years, 4 years to develop the business and get the right money in at the right time. Given that NovaUCD are a partner, we really want to try to develop the cluster of companies there. I was speaking to Damien from EI. I was making a joke this morning that we have an emerging semiconductor cluster at NovaUCD. We have 50 companies at NovaUCD, and today there's 5 of them who we could rate as being semiconductors. And thank you, many of you, for being here today. I mean, among them are obviously Equal One, very famous now. But Kelton have joined our community most recently. Lair Metrics are establishing their business in Ireland and will be located in NovaUCD. And we have other companies building different comms technologies for space applications, such as Setanta Space, a new company moving into NovaUCD, and OCE Technologies, who have been there for quite a while. So we'd like to build that community out. We can offer NovaUCD as a space for you guys to use for meetings. We'll have lots of different events there. We run investor day events, etc. Throughout the year. This is our location here. This is the area we run our investor day, and thanks to many of the representatives of different venture capital funds who are here today as well, who attend this event every year. But what we want to do is create a specific focus around semiconductors to bring you as a group into this environment in order to showcase what you have and create semiconductor focused centric programs within NovaUCD. So in practical terms, what does that look like? Well, we're looking at creating a number of different workshops. One would be for venture, one would be for grants. These would run biannually. We would run pitch deck training sessions where we'd work through your pitch deck with you, and if you want some coaching on how to present in a public forum, we can work with you on that. We can create panels of friendly VCs and mentors who can review those pitches for you. And then we will be creating and curating a database of deep tech investors who we will then segment by the stage, their location, and their speciality, so that we'll be able to very quickly get to who the best investors for you will be at what stage of your journey. We already have a number of systems in place at NovaUCD for promoting our community already. So we have a prospectus that we distribute regularly. We have a newsletter that we send out. So we'll just focus that, but for semiconductors, for the members of this group. And then we often have incoming VCs coming into NovaUCD as well, where we'll have open office days where people will come in, we'll have a selection of companies, and we'll have an open office session with that particular VC. So there's a regular, I suppose, community of activity around NovaUCD that you guys will be able to tap into through the I-C3 program as members of the centre. As this progresses, we'll hope to internationalize this, and this will be something that Ronan will be working on, will be to put together some outbound activities to get out to European venture summits, to get into the US and start to promote this cohort more widely outside of Ireland. And one of the starting points for that will be the Chips Venture Forum, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about now. But before I do, I'll just say that the grant supports that we're looking to put in place will be around looking at what grants are available, keeping you updated through scheduled email alerts on what's there and the application deadlines, having webinars where we'll invite the grant agencies to come in and explain how to apply the process, and then also access to people who can help you on actually writing the application documents. So this doesn't cost you anything as members of the centre. So the way this works is we've gone out, we've got some money to run this activity, and what we have to do is report back what we have delivered. So what we ask you to do is become a member, sign up to a membership letter, and we will record your participation in these funding programs that we will deliver for you against the de minimis balance that your company holds. And if that's something that you'd like to discuss with us, what is de minimis balance or how does it work, we're here to tell you about that. But ultimately, there's no money required to do this. We got the money already and we can use it for your benefit. So this is one of the programs which are running at a European level for all of the Chips Centres. This Access program tries to bring together member companies from all 30 of the different competence centres around Europe and take the best of them and bring them up into a venture summit that will be happening, the first of which will be in Bordeaux in October. So this is called the Info Venture Summit. There'll be about 50 VCs there. I'll explain why they're there a little bit later. But ultimately, if you want to get involved in this process, as a member of the centre, we can nominate you forward. We'll get you into the pipeline for this. We'll support you in developing your presentation and your pitch for this and get you over to Bordeaux. Once we get through that stage, the next phase, or phase 2 of this, will be the Chips Venture Forum at Semiconductor Europa, which will be in the Messe halls in Munich in November. And so at that, there will be the final 18 companies from across all of the 30 centres from across Europe who will be pitching to an assembled group of about 150 people there from the venture community. So I did a bit of investigation into, well, who are these people? And so far, I've managed to figure out that these are the people who will be in the room. So you can see that there's a wide range of different venture funds here. It's good to see that we've got Atlantic Bridge there. Paul Murray's name appears in the list. So there's a lot of companies here that are, I believe, they have money already from the Chips Venture Fund in their funds. So they're focusing these now back into this Chips Venture platform. So there's funds here actively seeking opportunities. And this is the showcasing process that we're going through to put the companies in front of these VCs at these different events. So the first thing for us to be aware of is that on the 16th of April, 2026, there's going to be an information webinar for the startups who want to get involved in this process. And as members of the centre, we can nominate you forward for that. And I'm working as part of the steering group for Access for this Chips Venture Forum on behalf of I-C3. So we can help to shepherd you through into this group and get you into that pipeline. So you spoke a little bit earlier, Patrick, about the gap, and this information John had shared with me, looking at the numbers, the difference in the numbers in cumulative funding from Europe and US. And there's a very large gap here. 140 billion has been invested between 2022 and 2025 in Europe in deep tech companies, but then in the US it's 420 billion. It seems that as the rounds get bigger, the money's not coming from Europe, and there's a real scaling problem here. So 50% of the European companies that are getting up into Series D and E and these major volumes are not being funded by European VCs. And so in order to try to overcome this issue, it seems that they've developed 3 areas of support. The first is the InvestEU program, and this is putting 125 million into venture funds. So I suppose similarly to how Enterprise Ireland is funding many VC companies through, or becoming an LP in VC funds here in Ireland through its seed fund, this is like a bigger version of that. And it strikes me that those are the people who got the money. right? So that 125 million is being folded in to a number of different funds being operated by those individuals that are listed there. So that's an opportunity. We can't get to the 125 million directly, but it's through those funds that we can access that. The next layer is the EIC, the European Innovation Council, through the EIC Accelerator Program. And we know that this is a very commonly tread pathway. Lots of our companies have gone through EIC, and it continues to be a very important part of the non-dilutive funding that can be accessed by companies in this space. The third and the new thing that we see emerging is the Scale Up Europe Fund. So this is a new fund which is going to be made available to companies that are raising at a later stage, and there'll be direct investment from the EIF into the companies. So there's 5 billion that's been ring-fenced. This will be invested directly into the companies, but the round size for this is 100 million plus. So it's at a certain level. So we, as startups, will aspire to get there, figuring out how do we, look at the different stages we need to get through to actually be able to access this. And then for some of our companies, it will be the thing that they'll be going for in the next few years. So I wanted to look into this in a bit more detail. So I'll just spend about 2 or 3 minutes now and just talk a little bit about the numbers behind this. So I did some research and I tried to look at, well, what's happening in the UK first of all. So if we look at 2025, in the UK, about 40 deals were made in the semiconductor sector. About 750 million overall was invested. And here listed are some of the companies that raised, ranked in order of the size of the round, and the investors who invested into these companies, and a quick description of who they are. So it's interesting. There's some big-ish deals going on. There's not a huge amount of activity happening there. But it's really useful for us because we can see, well, who is making these investments, what kinds of companies are raising, and we'll dig much deeper into this data when we start building intelligence around, well, who's actually doing what here, and what are their specific interests. If you look at the same sort of analysis for the EU semiconductor market, you can see that the deal size is going up a little bit. There's some pretty significant funding rounds happening. There's some very significant valuations on some of these funding rounds. You can see I-C3 out of the Netherlands raised $250 million or 1.5 billion valuation. But when you look at who's investing, there's a lot of US funds are coming into these companies. This is what's happened basically Q1 of 2026. But another notable round or I suppose event was Pascal, which is a quantum computing company out of France. But these guys recently raised a round that preceded a SPAC deal. So they had a deal where they reversed into a listed company on the NASDAQ. And through that deal, they achieved a valuation of 2.6 billion. I think they unlocked about 600 million of capital. So there's very interesting things happening here, clearly. But then I looked at the US market, and I looked at the quantums of money that were being placed into businesses over there. And it just went to a different level. And when I looked into this in a little bit more detail around the amount of money that's been invested per round and the valuations, I saw some wild things. So this company here, Cerebras, has anyone heard of this company? Yeah? Yeah, I was not familiar because I'm not an expert in this area. But what absolutely fascinated me about this was these guys raised $1 billion in Q1 of this year at a valuation of 23 billion. The valuation of that company in September 2025 was 8.1 billion. So the uplift in value in a 6-month period is 3 times the entire budget that we're putting into the Scale Up Europe Fund. I mean, it's off the charts, this stuff. I don't know if this is terribly depressing or terribly exciting, but the quantums that we're seeing here are quite fantastic. And I think the opportunity that we have here today is to see, do we have companies that we can get to this level in the next 5 years? With this sort of stuff happening in the world, with the amount of investment that's going into, particularly driven by this AI revolution that we see today, can we find companies like this here, and can we help them to put on a map when it comes to these kinds of scales of business? So that's all from me. The next step for you is please sign up for the I-C3 program. Become a member and let us help you to access the right capital to help you scale your business. Okay, thank you very much.